My name is Audrey Bennett. I was 33, and I was sitting in my car outside the museum in Chicago when I opened the envelope my grandmother had mailed. Inside was Travis Bennett's wedding program, thick cream paper with embossed letters, and a folded note in Ruth Bennett's unsteady hand that read, "Call me before you see photographs online." I stared at my brother's name beside a date already gone, then at the note again, and the air inside the car turned cold enough to sting. When I called Ruth, her voice came through worried, and before I could ask, she breathed out, "Honey, your mother told everyone you were too sick to attend." My mouth went dry as I asked, "What are you talking about?" And Ruth went quiet for one beat before telling me Travis had gotten married last weekend without me. Then she gave me the part that split everything open, that my parents had told the family I was ill, exhausted, and unable to be around people at all. I looked through the windshield at my own reflection and felt like I was staring at a woman whose life had been edited by people who shared her last name. Ruth kept talking, saying she thought I knew, saying she could not stand hearing them repeat that lie, and I could hear her own shame landing beside mine there. When the call ended, I started the engine with the program still open on my lap, because once that note was in my hands, nothing in me stayed numb. At the first red light, I opened Instagram with my thumb still shaking, because Ruth's note had given me one instruction, and I needed proof. The first photo showed Travis under a white floral canopy in a ballroom, smiling as if nothing had been hidden and nobody cut out. I kept swiping until I found my father raising a champagne glass, my mother crying through a toast, and tables of people I knew. There were cousins from Michigan, neighbors from our old block, my father's golf friends, and women from my mother's arts committee, all dressed up. This was not a quiet ceremony with narrow seating, and that lie died the second I saw 100 familiar faces smiling back at me. I called my Aunt Teresa, and the pause before she spoke told me enough, because only guilty people measure a silence that carefully first. When Teresa finally said, "Honey, we were told not to bother you because you were sick," my hand tightened around the steering wheel hard. I asked who told her that, and she gave me the answer I already hated. Your mother told everyone the same story that day. Before I could hang up, Paige picked up from Teresa's house line and blurted, "Wait, you didn't know, because we all thought you knew." That was the moment humiliation became evidence, not a feeling, and I backed out of the parking space already knowing where I was going. I did not need more photographs after that, because between the ballroom, the guest tables, and Paige's voice, the whole city had attended it. By the time I turned onto my parents' street, the program sat beside me like proof from a trial I had never agreed to. I pushed through my parents' front door with the wedding program in my hand, and Marianne froze in the hallway like she already recognized the paper. She started with, "Audrey, why are you here this late?" And I laid the program on the console table and asked why everyone knew except me. Her mouth tightened before she tried. "We thought a crowded wedding would overwhelm you." And that flimsy lie only made the room feel meaner. Douglas came in from the den, glanced at the program, and muttered, "Is this really worth a scene?" As if my absence were a scheduling note. I asked which one of them had told the family I was sick, and he gave me the ugliest answer first. "We handled it that way. Not because you were busy, not because you forgot, but because it was easier for you to invent an illness than admit you cut me out." Travis came down the stairs adjusting his cuff, took one look at me, and smirked. "Audrey, you would have been uncomfortable there anyway, with ballroom photos still burning in me." I turned to Douglas, and he finished what Travis started, saying the bride's side was polished, the room was cultivated, and I did not belong right there before me now. Then he made it plainer, asking what I could possibly add in a room like that, because all they could picture was embarrassment. I asked whether they heard themselves, and Marianne whispered, "Please stop doing this tonight." Like my pain was the breach, and their lie was manners for them. When I told them not to expect seats at my wedding, Travis laughed first, and Douglas followed with, "Audrey, you do not have a wedding to protect." I left with the program still in my hand, because after hearing I did not belong in that room, I refused to beg outside into air that finally felt honest. When I got home, I set the wedding program on my kitchen counter and finally noticed the ring on my own hand, catching the light above it. I had worn that ring for 6 months, through Sunday dinners, birthdays, and every strained visit where my family studied me closely enough to judge everything except what mattered. They had missed the most important fact of my life because they had never really looked, and that realization hurt more than anything Douglas had thrown at me. Owen was already there when I walked in, sleeves rolled, waiting without questions. And the second he saw my face, he asked, "Do you want comfort or honesty tonight?" I handed him the program, watched him read Travis Bennett and the date that had already passed, and then told him everything, from Ruth's note to my father's voice. He listened all the way through before saying, "Then, decide whether your wedding is going to be your life beginning, or another performance for people who keep choosing not to see you." That sentence settled something in me because the program was still on the counter. My ring was still on my hand, and both pieces of paper mattered differently. I told him I wanted a small guest list. No apology invitations, no last-minute peace talks, and no seats reserved for people who had laughed. He nodded once and said, "Then we build the day around truth." And that was the first moment since Ruth's call when the room around me finally felt steady again. A week after the program landed in my lap, Marianne called with a brightness in her voice she had never used when my life was small enough to ignore. She opened with, "Ruth mentioned something wonderful, and by the time she reached, 'Of course your father and I will be there,' I already knew this was not remorse." I told her there would be no invitation, and the silence that followed felt different from the others because this one was calculating. Her next question came careful and almost casual, asking who Owen Whitaker was and whether he belonged to the Whitakers from Lake Forest. The second I confirmed it, her tone turned warm in that public way she used at fundraisers, all polished concern and sudden maternal entitlement. She moved quickly to, "Audrey, people will expect your parents there." And I let the word people hang between us because it explained more than love ever had. That night, Travis called pretending to check on me. But after 2 empty sentences, he got where he wanted and asked where the wedding invitation was happening. When I told him Lake Forest, he laughed once and asked, "Are you really doing this in front of that family? Or are you planning to hide behind candles and borrowed elegance?" I told him the guest list was closed, and he gave me the same cruelty in a cleaner suit, saying, "Just do not embarrass yourself trying to look like you belong there." 2 days later, I was on the phone with Ruth when she forgot to mute, and my parents' voices drifted through her kitchen like smoke finding cracks. Douglas dismissed the whole thing as tasteful on a budget, while Marianne worried aloud that it would look odd if people heard their daughter had married into the Whitakers without them present. I ended the call with Ruth still apologizing in the background, because by then I understood the rule completely. I had only become worth claiming once my life reflected well on them. The estate in Lake Forest was quiet in the way expensive things often are, with stone paths, clipped hedges, and late light settling softly across the lawn. Diane adjusted my veil with careful hands and told me, "Nothing here needs to prove itself." And I realized she meant the place, the day, and me. That one sentence steadied me more than any speech could have, because it met the exact bruise my family had pressed for years. Teresa kissed my cheek before the ceremony and murmured, "The front row belongs to the people who showed up, not the ones who think blood reserves them seats." Paige fixed the fall of my sleeve while Taryn laughed about my hands shaking, then promised, "Good. That means this matters." And somehow that made breathing easier. Nobody asked me to forgive anything. Nobody suggested reaching out. And that absence felt more loving than all Marianne's borrowed concern ever had. When Owen took my hands beneath the trees, he did not speak in grand lines, only said, I read that program on your counter and understood something immediately. Then he looked at me with the calm that had carried me this far and added, "You will never again have to guess whether you were wanted." I heard Ruth crying in the first row at that, and for the first time since her note reached me, the evidence in my life pointed somewhere gentle. Dinner moved under strings of warm light, close enough for laughter to carry without anyone raising a voice or performing happiness for strangers. There were no empty seats marked for my parents, no symbolic gestures, no ache where they should have been, only the clean relief of not managing them. By the time Paige and Taryn posted a few photographs, I was already on the dance floor with Owen, and the day they said I could never have was over. The photographs had barely finished circling through family phones when Marianne posted a long Facebook caption about heartbreak, duty, and the daughter who had shut out loving parents without warning. Teresa sent me screenshots before breakfast and wrote, "Save everything," because Marianne was not grieving privately. She was rewriting me in public while my wedding flowers still lived on tables. Charles read the post once, set down his glasses, and said the family council would request removal of false statements, preserve copies, and end this before it spread any further. The post disappeared within hours, and that silence felt cleaner than any argument online could have, because nobody in my new family needed to beg for truth from strangers anymore. Months later, an email from a hiring coordinator landed in my inbox, asking whether I would serve as a professional reference for Travis Bennett on a museum partnership project proposal. I replied that I had not agreed to be listed, could not confirm his qualifications, and preferred my name be removed from the file immediately without further contact from him. 2 days after that, Travis pounded on my apartment door and started with, "You are my sister," before I opened it wide enough to answer him without stepping aside first. I told him family had not mattered when he needed me erased from his wedding, and he only remembered blood when he needed access to a room through my name. He stood there with nothing left to say. And when I closed the door, the last useful thing my family owned about me was gone for good that afternoon, too. A few months after Travis left my door empty-handed, I found out I was pregnant, and the first person I called was Ruth, because her note had started everything before. She cried the moment she heard my voice change, then laughed through it and told me, "This baby is already arriving in a house where truth gets to stay now." For a little while, I let that joy remain untouched. Just me, Owen, and Ruth holding something new that had not been measured against Travis by anyone in family. Then a package arrived with knitted baby booties, and before I opened the box completely, I saw Marianne's photograph tucked inside like a claim on something she had not earned. That same afternoon, Teresa sent me Marianne's newest post, all soft light and borrowed joy, announcing excitement for both of her grandchildren as if history had been edited again tonight. I read it once, set the booties beside the printed screenshot, and understood they were still trying to enter my life through objects and public language instead of truth, entirely. So I wrote one email and kept it plain. Remove the posts. Stop speaking for me. Do not arrive unannounced, and let Teresa handle any contact until I say otherwise. I added the part that mattered most, that if they ever wanted to meet my child, they would first name what they did and apologize without trimming a single fact. When I rested my hand over my stomach that night, I knew my child would never inherit the confusion I did, only the safety I fought to build here. Thank you for staying with me through this part of my life. If this story felt close to your own, I hope you find the kind of love, peace, and steady home that lets your heart rest and your future begin again.